Good morning, everybody. As I stand here with you today, my mind floods with memories of the 8 years that I served you as your music director. As you all know, I've worked as a singer and as a choir director in various settings, including with professionals, college students, and in various other denominations. But in none of those circumstances was the music created therein more rewarding than the music we made right here together in this beloved sanctuary. So often, I think about our dear friend Bob Fazakerly and the mutual affection and mutual musical collegiality that he and I shared. In fact, the solo that I sang today was one that he gave to me. He picked it and he brought the music. He said, "Jason, I want you to learn this. It'd be perfect for you." And it was. And I sang it here for you many times, which is why I selected it to sing today. I think about our concert tours with the choir in Hungary and Romania and the Czech Republic. My life was forever changed to experience the welcoming and generous-hearted people of Romania. I specifically remember teens dancing in their customary costumes as we all shared their food and warm hospitality in the church building as it was amid repair. And of course, it was my high honor to direct the hard-working and dedicated choir members here and to count myself as part of the legacy of music that has come to define this church as a center of quality music throughout Houston. Together, we produced high-quality concerts every winter and every spring. Gabriel Fauré's Requiem, Dave Brubeck's La Fiesta de la Posada, and so many others. And of course, the commission premiere of Elizabeth Alexander's Sources, which is now a published staple in Unitarian Universalist literature. That marked the end of my career here. I'm so grateful for the years that I spent on the board of the UUMN and the personal spiritual growth that I experienced on retreats with the Unitarian Universalist religious professionals of color. I cannot express my gratitude for the abundant blessings and boundless support I received from this denomination, and in particular this congregation. As a performer, I am used to standing before a congregation to sing or to conduct, but today marks for the first time that I'm speaking in this capacity. And not surprisingly, it's another first that was afforded me by you, my Unitarian friends, my Unitarian family. Thank you. When I was approached to speak to you today, I was flattered that you still think of me fondly and that you thought that I might have something valuable to share from this podium. Because I'd already been asked to give the workshop this afternoon about spirituals, I thought to myself, well, I could always speak about spirituality in the spiritual or something lecture that would link the two events together. But some of you may remember that I was scheduled to give this afternoon's presentation in February of 2020. I suspect that some of you here this morning showed up for that presentation and were surprised or maybe disappointed when I myself did not show up. The reason for my not showing up on that afternoon is the central part of the uniquely personal testimony that I stand before you to share this morning. Over the course of my life, like most people, I've been in a few tough scrapes, sometimes born out of my own bad decisions, and other times by happenstance. Somehow, I've always managed to come out of these tough scrapes whole. And in my past, I have known illness, even serious illness. And each time, I walked away from my bed of infirmity, hardly worse for wear. In the Christian traditions, we call this grace. In the religious sense, grace is defined as favor from God that is not earned. We call this unmerited favor. We are taught that we receive this favor through salvation from God and other blessings from God, and until recently, I have taken this grace for granted. We must remember that grace is not an inevitable outcome, as it could always be otherwise. Since early 2020, all of us have experienced the loss of family, friends, and others, whether it was fallout from COVID, accidents, other illnesses, or whatever. And this was the context of my latest and most powerful personal testimony of grace and favor. Throughout the second half of 2019, in fact, I was plagued by several new health issues and visits to the doctor, medical tests, new medications, and unexplained conditions. Nevertheless, throughout this time, I went to work. I took students to Europe in the summer. I accepted singing and speaking commitments. But increasingly, as the months passed, I felt as though I was dragging myself from place to place. I, who usually bounded out of bed early in the morning full of energy, was struggling to get out of bed, often showing up late to appointments, confused sometimes, and forgetting even meetings that I myself had called. Without trying, I'd lost a considerable amount of weight. Luckily, I had the weight to lose, but that's a different sermon. Tired and never able to give anything my full commitment, I was walking through my own life like a zombie. Well, in February of 2020, that marked the end or the conclusion of this period. One Sunday morning, I traveled to my current church job as choir director at St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Katy, Texas, and as usual, I came home afterwards and I got back into bed. And I stayed there. Over the course of the following week, from Sunday to Sunday, it was as if I were an hourglass. As the sand drifted out, my energy, my very life source, grew weaker and weaker. I laid in bed, dazed and confused, in and out of consciousness. And at some point, I lost the days of the week, the hour of the day, whether it was day or night. I missed several important commitments. For example, I oversaw the upcoming college fundraiser, and I missed the final meetings related to the preparation and execution of the event, which I had overseen. I missed a lecture that was given by a guest speaker and the annual marquee event of an organization of which I am the artistic director. And I did not show up for my usual teaching. I later learned that my phone had been ringing off the hook, and by midweek, people were showing up at my door. I stopped eating, and my normal body functioning stopped. I was hallucinating. My office called, my friends and family called and texted, but I did not know. Eventually, my administrative assistant came to my home. She says that I staggered to the door. I don't remember the visit or the conversation. The next thing I remember is that it was Sunday again. I know this because as choir director at a church, I didn't show up for my normal responsibilities. The church leadership sent someone to my home to do a wellness check, and later, Sunday afternoon, they were in contact with people on my reference list, and as best I can put it together, that set things into motion. My friend, Freddie Abney, came by my house as a result of a contact from another friend who was contacted by the church. She tried to get me to eat and to go to the hospital, but she says I refused to do so. She left me, but the encounter bothered her so intensely that she contacted my niece, and they returned just after sunrise the following day. She and my niece, Ashley Mitchell, walked into the house. Ashley has a key. And they took me, they say against my will, because I kept saying to them, oh, I'll be okay. Right, stupid men. To the hospital. After a brief stay at Memorial Hospital in Pearland, which is very near my home, and another brief stay at Memorial Hospital right here in the medical center, I ended up at Methodist, right here in the medical center, which would be my address for the next several weeks. I later learned that I was delving into an advanced state of physical decompensation. The doctor told my family that had they intervened only a day or two later, they may have found a corpse lying in my bed rather than an extremely sick man. This was grace. The next thing I remember clearly is that at one of those hospitals, I woke up with my then 88-year-old dad and 5 out of my 6 siblings surrounding my hospital bed. All the details and linear timeline of this period are foggy or completely unknown to me. Frankly, I've not had the courage to talk to my siblings and close friends to reconstruct these details. But after all, they aren't so important. At some point, I, a teetotaler, was diagnosed with liver failure and I fell into a 2-week-long coma. After attempts to treat my native liver failed, it was determined that I would not survive without a transplant. And once it was decided that I was a viable candidate, which there was some intense discussion among the doctors whether or not I would be, a suitable liver was identified within 24 hours of the decision. That was grace. Other than my niece, who had moved to Houston during 2019, I don't have any close relatives who live in Houston. All of my siblings are professional people who live in various cities around the country. I'm grateful that each was able to take turns being in town with me while I was ill. My brother let the cat out of the bag. He said casually, "I didn't want you to die here by yourself." Lucky for them, in that circumstance, I got a lot of siblings. They made sure that throughout my entire 2-month hospital stay, I was never alone. Using my house as the Houston Hilton Southeast, they took shifts, planning who would fly here to Houston for a week and who would cover them when they necessarily had to go back to their own families or workplaces for a time or necessary event. Even when visitors were no longer allowed in the hospitals due to COVID, my brother Michael, who's also a college professor, secured permission to teach online from my house when his campus was closed to face-to-face teaching because of COVID. He, even after that, FaceTimed me daily. They, along with my friends, Freddie, made sure my bills were paid until they could access my accounts, that my dog was cared for, and that my job remained secure and my HR benefits were in place so that my mortgage and other monthly obligations could be met long term. This too was grace. All along, I hallucinated in and out of a fitful dream state. I was not aware of everything, but I was aware of some things. The linear aspect of time left me, and in my mind I imagined that I was wearing long braids. You can laugh at that, go ahead. But I think this was my mind's way of making sense of the numerous lines that were attached to my head to measure my brain activity. The home improvement show on the hospital room TV was about me and my house. I could see me on the screen approving what they were doing and what they were doing to the house to make it suitable for me. And at one point, I was hanging by the scruff of my neck in a cold locker room wearing my hooded bathrobe. I'm sure that was because the pillows placed under my head were situated in such a way that my neck tilted my head forward towards my chest in an uncomfortable way. For some reason, at one point, I hallucinated that I was up on my knees in the hospital bed talking to Father Mark Wilkinson, the priest who's my current boss at the Episcopal Church, who had come to visit me. I was fiddling with my imaginary braids as I talked to him. I don't claim to be able to explain that one away. It's all very funny in retrospect now that I've made it through, but this too was grace. Some of the times my thoughts ran to sober things too. Someone would tell me that this person had died or that person had died, and I clearly remember thinking, well, if such and so died and he was only 57, and such and so died and he was younger than I am, maybe I'll die too. I think it's strange now, but I was completely unafraid and strangely comfortable with these thoughts. That was grace. And I remember the coma too. When I was a child, I suffered from what my dad called the witch riding your back, which is a colloquial description of a form of sleep paralysis that is known commonly and reported by children all over the world. When called witch riding, it's typically reported by African Americans from the South, particularly in Louisiana, where it also has a sense of cauchemar, which is a sense of night terrors, and it has West African roots. Sleep paralysis is your mind waking up before your body does. It's a feeling of being conscious, but being unable to move, and occurs when a person passes between stages of wakefulness and sleep. A person's body is asleep, yet their brain is awake enough to perceive their surroundings. This explains why a person's body has a sensation of being very heavy or immovable. The coma experience was similar. Although I had no sense really of the passage of time, I do remember trying to wake up or find myself actively looking for me. In my mind, I was singing, so, fa, mi, re, do, re, mi, fa, and pushing my fingers, fingering the scale. I don't know if I was really doing it, but in my mind, that's what I was doing. And I also would cry out in my head, glory to God in the highest, glory to God in the highest. And I kept thinking, let me try something different, trying to think of different things to do to break myself out of that frozen state. I found myself not in my body, but in my essence, in a galaxy of stars, and I then identified me. I said to myself, there I am. And the next thing I realized, I was roused from my 2-week coma. My brothers Scotty and Michael, one on each hand, were there to greet me as my eyes opened. My sister Cynthia and my sister Carolyn were there also. And I heard Cynthia say, we've got him back, y'all. And then my siblings were all a mixture of laughter and tears. That was grace. I started to put it all together in my mind at that point, but I didn't completely understand what had happened. I held on to Michael's hand tightly, even after he was trying to loosen himself from my vice grip. It was instinct. I'm not sure why I did that. Even after my extensive hospital stay at Methodist and my stint in rehab at Kindred, Michael stayed with me, cooking, cleaning, driving me to my follow-up appointments and overseeing the visits from the home health care nurse and the physical therapist throughout the summer until I was able to care for myself. His ability to be able to take that time was grace. There were other deaths while I was hospitalized and afterwards among my family and friends. 2 of these come to mind strongly. One of my first cousins, a single man named James Obie, a few years younger than me, but in my same age cohort, was found dead in his home. One of my former students, Manny Berry, a single man in graduate school in Maryland, was found dead in his apartment. Dear Manny was discovered only because the stench of his decomposing body alerted his neighbors, who barely knew him, except for a cordial head nod in the hallway or parking lot. I often think, what must it have been like for him to suffer and die alone with no one to help him? Those 2 examples were among the numberless souls that were lost during this time. I was raised between the AMA traditions of the church that was introduced to me by my paternal grandfather and the Southern Black Baptist tradition of the small church where my paternal grandmother was among the elder deaconesses. As a musician, I have worked and participated in church music leadership and congregations of most major denominations over the past 40 years. But it was during my 8 years here that I spent as your music director at First Unitarian Universalist Church that I learned and took to heart that for me, the depth and breadth of true spirituality is no respecter of denomination or dogmatic tradition. Rather, my true spiritual formation lies in how I treat others and how I serve my community. Through this experience, I was forced to humble myself, to let go of control, to let go of my secrets, to surrender to what the outcome of the experience would be, whatever it would be. My pride made me wince when the nurses and lowest paid workers in the hospital stooped to wash me or help me to perform the most basic and intimate personal tasks. I was embarrassed and I felt a loss of dignity. I found myself constantly thanking them and apologizing to them. They were reassuring and grateful that I respected them enough to care about their feelings, and they were even more anxious to attend to my needs as quickly as they could. On one of these occasions, a nurse's aide gave me a pep talk. She said, "Don't you worry, Miss Dobie. I know that you are bothered by us doing this, but we do it every day. Do you notice how whenever you need something, several people come in to help? That's because we all enjoy helping you. You're such a nice person." I smiled broadly to hear it, and I surrendered to her care. I didn't think about whether someone was perusing my personal documents in my house or correspondence that they may have happened upon in my home, what they may reveal about my finances or my private habits. These people were my family, and they were here to assist the healthcare workers in keeping me alive. My comparatively petty and inconsequential things, my mind was lifted above them. This, too, was grace. Over time, I came to understand how others saw me in this situation. My dad, months into my recovery, innocently asked me if I were ever going back to work. It was a surprising question. I thought, of course I'm going back to work. I had not considered that others viewed me as being so disabled that my disability might be permanent. I found out that my siblings had been plotting for my long-term care. They didn't need to do that. That was grace. You see, 20 years ago, we had experienced, my siblings and I, my mother's death. 30 years ago, when she was about my current age, she was stricken with a massive stroke, which disabled her for 10 years before she died in 2002. There she lay in a nursing home, unable to speak, unable to move independently, unable to feed herself or even to talk. I suspect that my condition was an unwelcome reminder of the trauma that we all live through. By the end, her body was a contorted shell of what it was. It was many months after she died before I was able to dream about the beautiful, fashionable, energetic, feisty, and witty woman who was the mother that I had grown up with. Watching her untimely march towards an inevitable, unpleasant death was the formative experience of my young adulthood. Throughout this experience, I came to really accept that we are all a part of a larger community and that we need each other to survive, thrive, and grow. We tend to cling to earthly things, possessions, titles, definitions of ourselves based on how we believe ourselves to be perceived by others. Through this experience, I was reminded that all earthly things come to pass. Someone else will live in my house. My cars will rust and go into a junk heap. The artwork and furnishings that I've accumulated will hang in someone else's home or sit in someone else's house or end up in a junk shop, or whatever few dollars that I might manage to accumulate will be spent by somebody else. What will last is the memory that is carried by those whose lives I may have impacted. Yes, I have nieces and nephews that I love very much, but I must admit that as a single man with no children, except for those that I have taught over the last 35 years, this thought is not the happiest one for me. For the most part, I've spent my whole life alone, never ceding control. I guarded my privacy more fiercely than I guarded my money. Consequently, I negotiated my difficult challenges by myself. And in a perverse way, I was proud of my ability to persevere despite difficult challenges. And I judged others who seemed to be needy, either financially, emotionally, or in whatever other ways. What I did not understand, that what I had named strength was really a kind of weakness. I deflected vulnerability with the cloak of armor constructed of humor, sarcasm, charm, and nonchalance. But because of this experience, I now know that the armor that I wore did not really protect me, but rather it kept others out and prevented me from living a fully realized life wherein I could nurture true intimacy. But here's the dramatic ending. A little more than 2 years later, here I stand. I have another chance. This year, I've been singing professionally again. I go to work every day, and I've resumed all of my former activities. Probably need to drop some of that stuff, but that's a different conversation too. I've been in Europe again this year, just last month, and yesterday was my 59th birthday.